Hey everybody, welcome to Vision Lunchtime number 3. Yeah. If you've never been to a Vision event before, you're very welcome here. On behalf of Durham Christian Union, you're very welcome. Vision is a space to explore the person of Jesus. And today we're looking more closely at, are we going to destroy the earth? Yeah.
Is that the answer?
That's not the answer.
Okay.
Let me give you a rundown of how it's going to work today as well. We'll have a talk from our speaker, Sam. You'll be able to text in any of your questions to the number behind the screen, or on the screen behind me, while Sam is talking. And then we'll ask them to Sam once he's finished. Yeah, we'll also have a mic, so if you have any questions from the floor or anything you want to come back on, there'll be a lot of space for you to ask them direct to Sam. Yeah, so after the talk, we'll have a couple questions, and then because we value your time, if you need to leave at 2 o'clock, we'll make a brief pause at about 1:45, so you can slip out and get some more, get any of the leftovers, and then we'll come back for some extended question and answer time. I just want to say we're very aware that there's a whole range of worldviews represented here in the tent. And whatever you believe, you're very welcome here. We want to hear all your perspectives and all of your questions. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to let Sam give his talk and introduce himself to you. And Sam, while you introduce yourself to us, can you tell us what was the first album you got as a kid?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Excellent. First album I ever got, this was vinyl, obviously in those days, was the soundtrack to the first ever Star Wars movie, which I'm still really glad to have, actually. And my music tastes haven't grown much since I was about 7 years old. Thank you for being here. Again, we don't take your presence at these events for granted. If you've come back from previous ones, welcome back. We're glad to have you here again. If you're here for the first time, particular welcome to you. We feel very privileged to have you with us, and we hope that these sessions are useful for you, interesting. We hope they start conversations and spark discussion, and more than anything, we hope they encourage you to examine the claims of Jesus for yourself. Our question today is, are we going to destroy the earth? My full-time job is working for a Christian ministry, and I've been doing that kind of work really for the last 15 years. And so I'm not speaking to this issue because I have a sort of professional expertise in this topic. My interest in this topic is as a follower of Jesus and with the rest of us as a resident of this planet. This is the only planet I anticipate living on. Don't have particular plans to move to any other ones. And so with all of us, I have an interest in understanding the planet, the impact we have on our planet, and how we can look after it as well as we can. So I'm speaking on this because I'm interested, not because I have any kind of professional expertise. I've been interested in issues of the environment my entire life. In fact, the first job I wanted to have and what I was preparing to do with my life as a teenager was I was wanting to be an environmental campaigner. That's where I thought my life was going. In my teenage years, I was an activist with Greenpeace, was involved in various local events and campaigns and a few national ones as well. Back in the early 90s, the main causes that we were concerned about were pollution. We were concerned about issues like whaling, the ozone layer, and animal welfare. Obviously, today, there are far more pressing issues in addition to those ones. And it was as a Greenpeace activist, I found myself in the slightly absurd situation once of being threatened with hospitalization by a circus clown. If you didn't find clowns scary already, this would definitely make you scared of them. There was a circus visiting my hometown. They had an elephant used as part of their show. We had been led to understand the elephant was not being treated humanely, it was being treated badly, so we went to protest outside this particular circus. And We weren't doing anything kind of uncivil. We were just simply handing out literature to anyone who was interested. And the head clown, I didn't even know they had head clowns in circuses, came out and said, listen, if one more car turns away because you guys are here, I am personally going to put each one of you in hospital. The only kind of saving grace to that moment was he wasn't currently dressed as a clown as he made that threat. That would have been slightly too absurd. But in the end, he had to go off and get ready, and we were able to go home, and no one ended up in hospital. You may be thinking, what does Christianity have to do with issues of environmentalism? And my job today really is to try to commend to you the idea that our belief in the claims of Jesus Christ actually really matters to this conversation. We are not unaware of the scale of some of the environmental issues that are facing us. The challenges are not hard to see. They are including the following things and not limited to them. But we think of things like the loss of biodiversity, the rate at which species are going extinct is approaching catastrophic levels. It's been called an extinction, what is it called? An extinction threat level. I've totally forgotten what that phrase is. Again, I'm not a professional expert, but you get the point. The rate at which we are losing species is horrifying. There is the destruction of natural habitats. There's things like deforestation. We are losing topsoil in many places. When it comes to our oceans, we know that our oceans are warming as the climate is changing. They're becoming more acidic. That is affecting marine life. Coral reefs on current trends will be completely obliterated by the year 2050, and yet a quarter of marine life depends on coral reefs. We've got issues of things like overfishing. And obviously there is climate change itself, the rate at which the planet is warming, our own contribution to that are perhaps the things that are most pressing and most urgent to many of us. With that climate change comes things like declining levels of ice and rising sea levels and all that will result because of that. So it is hard to deny the seriousness of the environmental challenges that we face. We're all aware of them. Most of us aren't studying in these areas, but we're all aware of them because they are so pressing and because they involve all of us. This world is the home for all of us and for all other forms of life, and therefore all of us have a stake in this. Well, because of the seriousness of these times, it has led to some fairly unprecedented responses. In August 2018, a 15-year-old schoolgirl decided things were so urgent that she decided one Friday lunchtime to strike from school. And she sat outside the local parliament building in Stockholm in Sweden, and she had a sign that said, "School strike for climate." That girl with that sign triggered what has become now a whole movement around the world involving millions and millions of school students. Maybe some of you have been involved with these yourself. And this whole thing has catapulted Greta Thunberg to the global stage. She's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Time magazine named her their Person of the Year for 2019. She's spoken at various parliaments around the world. She spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos just a few weeks ago, I think. And perhaps most famously, last September, she spoke to the UN General Assembly. I recently read through, as I was preparing for today, every single speech of Greta Thunberg's that has been published. And she will often introduce herself by saying, "My name is Greta Thunberg, I'm 16 years old, I come from Sweden, and I want you to panic." It's interesting, no one is asking her, what was the first album you ever got as a kid. She says, "I want you to panic," because her concern is we should be freaking out, and we're not. She is anxious that not enough of us are anxious. And if you've heard any of her speeches, you will know the kinds of things she is saying. She says that the ecological issues we face are a threat to civilization itself and to future generations. That language is not only used by Greta Thunberg. We're familiar with movements like the Extinction Rebellion movement. And again, the idea of just how severe the consequences will be if we don't take dramatic action now. Now, that has not been the only response. Actually, some climate scientists have pushed back against some of that kind of language. Michael Schellenberger wrote an article for Forbes magazine called "Why Apocalyptic Claims About Climate Change Are Wrong." He pushes back against some of the language used by the Extinction Rebellion group and says that the language they use of billions of people dying is causing unusual levels of anxiety in young people. He says it ends up alienating the very people who want to change their behavior, and he says it's scientifically not true. And he argues that we're not seeing the potential extinction of the human race or the collapse of civilization. He does argue strenuously that it is incredibly serious. He himself has been awarded the Time Magazine Hero of the Environment Award, so he's no slouch when it comes to issues of the climate. And so literally, if we're going to take the question, are we going to destroy the Earth? We are not. Actually, the planet's going to be okay. I mean, the planet's still going to be here. The pressing issue is whether and to what extent we risk destroying huge amounts of life, including huge amounts of human life. That is the issue that we are most concerned about. And it's in the context of that discussion I want to try to suggest that Christianity is relevant to these discussions. And I want to suggest that Christianity is relevant for three reasons. The first thing is this: Christianity shows us why this issue matters so much. It's interesting listening to the speeches of Greta Thunberg and many others, just how much language we use of moral absolutes when it comes to this discussion. People who might say in other areas of life, other discussions, that there's no such thing as absolute right and wrong, are very quick to say that when it comes to issues of climate change, there is an objective right and there is an objective wrong. Greta Thunberg herself says in a number of her speeches, this is the most black and white issue you can get. It is clear cut. And yet the very fact that we use absolute moral language on this is something we need to account for. A colleague of mine is a speaker called Nathan Rittenhouse, who's done a lot of work on this issue. And he said this: he said, the concept of environmental destruction assumes the concept of proper environmental order. And for there to be proper environmental order, there must be an environmental orderer. In other words, the very fact that we care about this issue, the very fact that we sense there are absolute morals when it comes to this, is evidence of the fact that there is an objective reality beyond us. That is certainly something I think the Bible well accounts for. The very first sentence of the Bible tells us this is God's world, that he has made it. Psalm 24 says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And therefore, because God has made the world, that is why there is an absolute right and wrong to these discussions. There is such a thing as a way that the world is meant to be. In the language of my colleague, there is such a thing as environmental order because there is a God who has made this world for a particular purpose in a particular way. And so part of the inside of Christianity is that God made this world, he cares about this world, and he cares about all life on this world. And so the Bible doesn't claim that this planet is either the product of just pure randomness, Nor does it say that this planet is simply a commodity for us to use. No, the Bible says something many of us sense. It says that this world it's a work of art. It's a work of art. A friend of mine pointed out that inside the word earth, you have the word art. As we look at the world around us, we see such beauty. It means something. And therefore, it is appropriate to use moral categories. It matters when species are lost. It matters what we do with this world precisely because there is a God who made this world. So I want to suggest Christianity can help account for why this issue matters. Secondly, Christianity can help account for why we matter in this. In one of Greta Thunberg's speeches, she talks about how when she was even younger, I mean, she's young, but even when she was younger and was first becoming aware of environmental issues, she said the question that most perplexed her was this: why is it that humans have this unique capacity to affect the planet in the way that we do? What is it about us that means we can have this potentially disastrous impact on the planet in a way that no other creature seems to? It's not as if we're worried about certain other species totally wrecking the place, but we seem to be able to. And her question is, what is it about us that makes us so uniquely capable of causing so much irreversible damage? And the Bible actually answers that question. There is something unique about us. The Bible says that we are made in the image of God, that we are, along with all other creatures, we are creations of God. But unlike other creatures, the Bible says we have been made in God's image. We have been given some unique capacities, which means we can impact this planet in a way that other creatures can't. And in God's original design, if you read through the accounts of creation in Genesis 1 and 2, we are meant to have an impact on this planet. God has actually made us in Genesis 1 and 2 to be stewards of this world on God's behalf. And so there is a sense in which, according to the Bible, God has designed nature to depend on us in some ways. And so the fate of nature, the fate of the physical world, is bound up with us. Whether we like it or not, we do have that kind of clout, and we are able to have that kind of impact. That is not to say that we are superior to creation and can kind of lord it over creation. The focus actually in Genesis is that God is superior to us, and we are meant to be looking after this world on God's behalf. It's actually meant to humble us and not make us arrogant. So it might be a parallel might be how, say, parents would want their kids to feel about the family home. A parent would want their child to enjoy the family home. They'd want them to feel at home there. But they would also want the child to know that the family home does need to be cared for. It does need to be looked after. It shouldn't be taken for granted. It shouldn't be squandered. And if the child was to show complete disrespect to the family home, actually that would be a reflection of their attitude to their parents. And so as Christians, I want to suggest we have even more reasons to care for the physical world. Not just because we have a love of other animals, a love of other species, not just because we're concerned for our potential children or grandchildren, but including those and even more than those is actually caring for this world is part of how we worship God. It's part of how we show we respect and worship God. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a Christian to be a good environmentalist. That's clearly not the case. But I think it does mean that Christianity gives us the best reasons to care for the physical world around us. So the Bible does say we have unique capacities. We are made in the image of God, but the Bible also says, as we've been sort of thinking through this week, we're also broken. We're just not very good at being people. We can't help ourselves. And so that capacity God has given us to be good stewards of this earth is actually now a very serious liability. We are meant to be a benefit to the planet, but because we're broken, we are actually, in some ways, a threat to the planet. And that actually has implications for every single one of us. The issue is not simply other people and what they're doing. The issue is all of us. James Gustav Speth, and apologies if I've mispronounced his name, was a former advisor to the US government on climate change. And he wrote these words. He said, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these," he says, "we need a cultural and spiritual transformation." In other words, the ultimate issue is human nature. Now, some people are more powerful. Some people are more culpable. Some people do have a larger impact on this world than others. But none of us is off the hook. Because the issue is ultimately the human heart. We have an ecological problem because we have a spiritual problem. All of us are responsible for what we purchase. All of us are responsible for how we consume. All of us are responsible for the extent of our own waste. And I would want to suggest there is no better way to have a healthy attitude to the planet than to have a relationship with its creator. So I want to suggest Christianity helps to account for why this issue matters. It helps to account for why we seem to matter when it comes to the planet. And finally, I want to suggest that Christianity shows us why Jesus matters in all of this. You may know, if you're familiar at all with the Bible, that one of the accounts in the book of Genesis is of a flood that God sends on the world as part of his judgment on human sin. And if you've heard the kind of story of this account, you've got Noah's Ark is made as a way of rescuing Noah and his family and to save a sampling of all the different animals that are out there. If you've ever gone near a church children's group, you've probably coloured in various elements of that story at certain points in your life. After the flood happens, according to Genesis 9, God makes a promise to Noah that he is never again going to judge the world like that. And if you've got one of these little leaflety things, I've just put a couple of things that God says to Noah on the sheet there, so you can take away and think about it. This is what God says to Noah. He's making a series of promises to Noah. And in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 12, God says, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth." Now, in the Bible, a covenant is not just a promise. It is a promise, but it's much more than that. It's a promise where God is saying he is going to put everything of who he is on the line for the sake of this particular promise. He's staking his own reputation with it. And in Genesis 9, we're told that God is making a covenant not just with Noah. It's not just a private arrangement between him and Noah. He says, "With me and you, Noah, and every living creature with you." So it's for all of life, all forms of life. A covenant for all generations, all of life for all time. And in the last sentence there, he says, it's a covenant between me and the earth. God is making a covenant with the planet. Now, in the Bible, whenever God makes a covenant, it's in order to save someone. He normally makes covenants with people to save them. But in Genesis 9, God makes a covenant with the earth. God is saying, I am committed to this physical world. This planet has an ongoing, eternal relevance to God. He has purposes for it. And so in Christianity, the earth isn't this kind of yucky, dirty physical environment that we need to kind of beam ourselves up from. It's not this random lump of material that will just, eventually splutter out and die. Part of the distinctive kind of idea of the Christian faith is that this world has eternal significance. It matters to God for eternity. However committed we think we are to this planet, God is even more so. So the big question is, well, what does this promise actually mean? If God is making a covenant with the world that he's not going to kind of judge the world in the way that he did with the flood, how is God going to fulfill that promise? What does it actually mean for us? Well, the key is the sign. God says the sign of this covenant between him and the earth is the rainbow. Now, I used to think that that's, that the rainbow's pretty and it's nice. It's a kind of sign that the storm is passing and the sun is coming out. Maybe that's the kind of the metaphor God has for us at the time of judgment is going, and it's all going to be nice and sunny from now on. But actually, the Hebrew word for bow is the word used for a weapon. The bow you would use in warfare. And so when God says, I'm hanging up my bow, he is literally saying, I am hanging up my weapon of warfare. I am no longer going to be at war with humanity. But here's the thing, God still needs to sort out all that is wrong with us. But he's made a promise not to destroy the earth again. So the reason this sign is a sign of this particular covenant is because God is hanging up his bow. He's no longer going to judge us and this world in the same way. And so the bow is not aimed down at earth. The bow is aimed up at the heart of heaven. In other words, God is saying, listen, next time I come to judge all of human wickedness, it's not going to be the planet that takes the hit. It's going to be me. And so God's ultimate way of committing himself to his creation is by stepping into his creation. As Jesus comes into this world, the Creator himself stepping into, becoming part of his own creation. And we believe as Christians that it's through the death of Jesus that he can not only save us from the destruction that we've brought upon ourselves, but ultimately it is the proof and the pledge that God is going to save the planet from the destruction we've brought upon it. Which it means he doesn't need to destroy this world to sort us out. And it also means that if God is that committed to this earth, we are not wasting our time seeking to look after it well ourselves. I'm going to stop there. Thank you, as always, for listening so patiently. I'm going to invite Tim back up. We'll get through a couple of questions before we give you guys a chance to leave if you need to.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Sam. And thank you very much for all of your questions that have been coming in. There's some great, thoughtful questions in here. And as you hear any answers, please keep texting in your questions. We'll also have the roving mic to go around if you want to come back on anything Sam said. But in interest of time, let's get started with a couple of them. Okay, so there's a great one here that starts. Are natural disasters like earthquakes and floods, etc., a work of our own doing or God's work? If they are God's work, how then is he good? And why should we worship him?
Thank you. That is an amazing question. I would love 30 minutes to answer it, but I don't have that, so I can only give you a very brief answer. There are some natural disasters where we know we have been a contributing factor to it. We know that certain extreme weather patterns are happening because of some of the changes that are happening to the climate, because of things that we are doing. So that there is a relationship between some natural disasters and what we do as human beings. That's not the case for every natural disaster. Volcanoes erupting is one that comes to mind. I don't think we can pin that on us. So not every natural disaster is a direct consequence of human behavior, but one of the things the Bible says is that every natural disaster is an indirect consequence of human behavior. Because one of the things we see in Genesis chapter 3 is our fracturing our relationship with God fractures our relationship with the physical world. The physical world in Genesis 1 and 2 was meant to be a place that was kind of a receptive, hospitable environment for us to flourish in a way that would enable the creation to flourish with us. But because in Genesis 3 it says we've turned away from God, that has actually changed nature. Nature now is not wholly for us. And so this world is still a place of remarkable beauty, a place that can bring us, incredible joy. But it's also a place that now causes us significant pain. And so in the language of Genesis 3, it's a world not just of beauty, but of thorns and thistles. It's a world that can hurt us. I mentioned thistle specifically because I'm assuming Hamish is somewhere in the room, and the thistle is the emblem of Scottish culture. And in Genesis 3, the thistle is a sign of God's curse. So I'm not making any comments on Scotland there for Hamish. But so there is a sense in which indirectly the very fact that this world is now a dangerous place to live in because of natural disasters is itself a consequence of the fact that we as a species are not in a right relationship with God. And so the world is reflecting back to us something of what our relationship with the Creator is like. It's a bit of a mirror in that respect. If you've seen the movie E.T., I know it's way too old a movie for many of you to have seen, but there's a flower that becomes connected with the alien E.T., and E.T. is dying when you see the flower kind of wilt and die, but there's a moment when you suddenly see this flower come back to life, and it's because E.T.'s alive. And the physical world is something like a reflection of the health of our relationship with our Creator. I hope that helps.
If anyone wants to come back on anything they've heard, please put your hand up and we'll get the mic to you.
And E.T. will be screened somewhere for your viewing pleasure at some point soon. You need to see it.
Yeah. But if not, we'll keep... Sorry, that sounded really sarcastic. Sorry. I didn't mean if not, we'll just move on to another question. And there have been a lot around this same theme. So I hope this captures what you're all trying to ask. If the Bible says God will destroy the earth one day, is there any point in looking after it now?
Thank you. I don't believe the Bible does say that. I think that the very point of this promise in Genesis is that is exactly what God is not going to do. I think Christians have misunderstood certain parts of the Bible and have got the idea that God is kind of, one day he's going to get the Death Star pointed at Earth and just blow up the whole thing. In which case, if that's going to happen anyway, then we don't really need to take a huge amount of care of it. When I was at university, in my second year, I was in a hall of residence that we were told at the end of that academic year would be demolished. You don't take great care of a building when you know it's going to be bulldozed the moment you leave it. And so we completely trashed the place. And if that's your view of what's going to happen to the planet, you will think, well, why should I care about the world if the whole thing's going to get bulldozed anyway? But I think Genesis 9 is showing us God is not going to do that. He's made a covenant with the earth. He is not going to wipe out the planet. And therefore, we're actually working with him and honoring that promise if, as Christians, we are stewarding this planet and caring for it well. So, yeah, that's what I think.
Thanks.
Oh, by the way, while we're on the subject of the world being destroyed, it's not the Christian worldview that says this planet is going to be destroyed. Actually, I think it's the secular worldview. If I've understood this rightly, I think if you are, strictly speaking, an atheist, and you believe that this world came about only by random processes, you do believe literally this world is one day going to burn. It's going to collapse. Christianity is unique because it says actually this physical world matters so much, actually it's relevant for all eternity. So I offer that as something to think about, and correct me if I've mischaracterized half the room.
Yeah, we want to be able to hear your questions right. So if you want to clarify anything, please put your hand up and come back. We actually have a hand, so we'll go straight there. Thanks, Anne.
Our roving mic needs to rove, so thank you.
Hi, great. Yeah, I just find that really interesting. I am a Christian, and I basically almost 100% agree with every single thing that you've said. But what you just said about God not destroying the planet, I find it interesting that in the last book of the Bible, Revelation, it talks about there being a new heavens and a new earth. And I'm just wondering, is your view therefore that basically God, he, rather than this is an old planet that he's gonna kind of wipe out or whatever, and then he's gonna create a new one, is it more that he is basically going to transform the current one or redeem the current one in some form? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Thank you, great question. A similar part of Revelation, God says, I will make all things new. He doesn't say, I will make all new things. All things he is going to make new. And so I think the best parallel for this is, just as we believe as Christians in the resurrection of the body, that our own bodies will be raised from the dead one day, so too this world will experience some kind of resurrection. So in other words, this world is worth looking after because it's got a future. This is attributed to Martin Luther, but apparently he didn't say it. I don't know who did say it, but I really like it. Someone said, if you knew that Jesus was going to return tomorrow, and God was going to kind of call time on everything, and Jesus was going to return tomorrow, what would you do today? Not Martin Luther, but whoever it was, said, well, one of the things I would do is I would plant a tree because it would do really well. And I think there's truth to that. I like that. There is an eternal future for this planet, and so it's worth working on.
Thank you for all of your questions. I'm really aware of the time, and I'm sorry to have kept you longer than I said I would. Please feel free to stay. We're going to have a lot more time for questions, and they're great, and I really want to get into them. Yeah, we'll make some time now if you need to go anywhere. We'll open the doors at the back and here at the front, too, if you need to go. And just before you go, I want to draw your attention to 3 things really quickly happening here at Vision. Number 1, this afternoon we'll have Global Vision, our international stream, which are events tailored for, but not exclusive to, international students. So that'll be happening in the cafe area at 5:15 this afternoon, and you're very welcome to come. Number 2, really quickly, tonight we are looking at... I need to grab a program really quick. Well, that's a good one. Okay, tonight we're looking at a vision for hope. What do we cling to when it hurts? You're very welcome to come along to that tonight. We'll have entertainment from Lady and the Tramps, and we'll have cookies and donuts and hot chocolate. And then finally, number 3, on your way out, if you've been interested in anything that's going on this week or anything Sam said, we have what we're calling our Connect Corner in the cafe, which has a number of books. They're all gifts to you, so if you're interested, please take one. They're gifts from the CU to you this week. Thank you guys for coming. We'll have a couple minutes, and then we'll come back together. Great. Hey, everybody, we're going to come back for questions and some more questions and answers. We'll try and wrap it up around 2:30. Yeah, we just value your time, and we're very grateful you're here. So we want to respect the time that you're giving us. But now we've got a good half an hour to really chat through these things a bit more deeply. And we're going to start off with this question. It says, you say we have an ecological problem because we have a spiritual problem. Do you believe if everyone on the planet converted to Christianity, the environmental problem would soon be solved? Does that imply that only people who aren't Christian contribute towards climate change?
Thanks for these questions. As ever, we're grateful for your engagement. It's fun to hear your thoughts as well. So there are more than one part to that question. I explicitly said being a Christian you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to be an environmentalist. But being a Christian gives you the best reason to be an environmentalist, because you're not just looking at this world, you've got an additional set of reasons to value and cherish this world, in addition to the ones that we would all agree on anyway. So no, I'm not saying that that this is the fault of non-Christians and the Christians are here as the cavalry to kind of, rescue everything. I'm simply saying that if we have a right relationship with our Creator, nothing is more likely to help us have a consistently healthy relationship with the creation than having a right relationship with the Creator. So there's a huge amount of environmental work that's being done by people who don't believe in God, and that's great. I'm not saying you have to believe in God to do that, but I do think more people coming to know and love the Creator is going to change our attitude to His creation. So I think it would help if more people became Christians. I hope it would mean there are more of us with that extra commitment to the environment. That's not to say every Christian is good at this. Many of us are not.
Great. If anybody wants to come back on anything, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. But if not, we'll move on to another question. Thanks, Sam. There have been plenty of natural extinctions which have occurred before the existence of humans on Earth. So how do these destructions of our planet have anything to do with the human relationship with God?
Thank you. Yeah, there have been, if memory serves, and some of you will know far more about this than I will, and if I get any of the facts or figures wrong, just correct me. I think there have been 5 extinction level events up until now that people have talked about. The most recent was the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, was it a meteor that we think impacted the Earth and caused that loss of species. The current time we're in is being called as the 6th extinction level event, simply because of the scale of the loss of species. Those previous extinction level events don't seem to be related to what we've been doing, because they were independent of what we're up to now. This one does seem to be very significantly affected by our own consumerism, our own pollution, climate change, all those sorts of things. So this one seems to be different because it's not happening for, in quotes, natural reasons. It seems to be happening as a result of our impact on the planet.
Great.
Hope that answers that.
I've had a couple questions that are very thoughtful and very deep.
Just a couple that were thoughtful.
Particularly
thoughtful.
Particularly
okay,
thoughtful.
just
Particularly.
Thank you for the thoughtless ones as well. We value those too.
I'm getting roasted here. That are particularly long, and I'd love to talk about them, but I feel like they could be better discussed just more personally up here. So Sam will be here at the front once we've finished our question and answer time. And so please come and talk to him, and get some more time with him to be able to have a deeper, more personal conversation with Sam about it. We'll move on to another question here. It says, how would you respond to Christians who claim that because God gave dominion over creation to humanity in Genesis 1, we can and should use its resources to whatever extent we please?
Thank you. I would suggest that is a half-truth and not a full biblical truth. In 1967, a professor from Princeton University called Lynn White wrote an essay called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, and Professor White significantly blamed Christians for what was even then being called an ecological crisis. White wrote that Genesis 1 teaches us that we are superior to nature, contemptuous of it, and willing to use it for the slightest whim. In other words, White was saying that the Christian doctrine of creation and of the place of humanity over creation gives us permission to exploit nature because we have dominion over it. Now, Genesis 1, I believe, does show us we have dominion over nature, but it also shows us that the type of authority we are meant to be exercising, because Genesis 2 then says we are to tend creation and to look after it. And so whatever dominion we have is meant to be exercised in a way that actually isn't actually destroying the world, but is tending it on behalf of its creator. And again, in Genesis 1, the account of creation, we repeatedly hear the refrain from God that what he has made is good. Creation is a good thing that we are called to look after and to steward well. And so that doesn't give us warrant simply to use the planet for anything that satisfies us, because the planet is not a commodity. It's like if someone gives you a piece of art to look after, actually it matters that you don't deface it. And if the world is actually a piece of art produced by God himself, then to destroy it actually is, well, it's sacrilege. And so I think it's a misunderstanding of Genesis 1 that says we get simply to exploit the planet. That is not the role God has given us. Because we are fallen creatures, we are naturally selfish, so that will be our individual and kind of communal default setting to exploit. But that is not the role God has given us. And so actually I think a proper understanding of Genesis 1 humbles us, gives us reason actually to be in awe of creation rather than puffing us up to kind of, exploit it.
Thank you for your questions. We got one question here, a good, very perceptive question. It says, is it not hypocritical that catering systems at this event and events like these themselves hurt the planet? And we've noticed the irony, the potential irony in that situation. And so this year, all of our cups and our plates and our bowls are compostable and recyclable. And we have recycling bins around the tent. But thank you for your question. And we know there's a lot of work to do. And as a CU, we care about how we treat the planet too, and want to practice what we preach as well. I was going to add to that it's there is always a tension in some of these things, because I'm pretending I'm speaking for the CU. I'm not. I'm their guest, not their representative. But the CU were wanting these events to be hospitable and to feed you. And so what is the most environmentally friendly way we can offer you a free lunch would seem to be to have combustible and biodegradable materials. I guess it would be possible to ask everyone to bring their own plate with them that they can then wash up later on, but you have to kind of balance that over what people are realistically going to be able to do. So, yeah, thanks, Sam. We have a question that leads out of that pretty well that says, what is the church doing to help the environment?
Thank you. There is no kind of one Christian entire entity called the church, so I can't answer, because different Christians, different denominations, different individual churches are doing different things. Some churches are more conscious of environmental impact than other churches. There's varieties of levels of awareness and of care on these things. I know increasing numbers of churches are trying to think through energy usage, recycling, wastage, all those kinds of things. And there have been a lot of Christian initiatives and efforts that have come out of the church. I think of our Rocha, which is a creation care ministry, actually that's been around for decades, but which has come out of people with a distinctively Christian approach to these things.
We have a question from, I think a Christian perspective. It says, should the church see their calling as more than just evangelism, but also to help the environment?
I think, obviously.
Yeah.
I would say the church was never called simply to do evangelism. I mean, part of our role in society is to commend Jesus to other people. We're supposed to do that. But to imply that's the only thing we're meant to care about would seem to me to be a very shriveled view of the Christian life and of what we're meant to be as Christians. We're interested in all of life for all people, and we're interested in serving the Lord in every way he gives us to serve him.
If you want to come back on that or talk to Sam more about it, please come and talk to him at the end. We'll be down here for a while. Okay, we have another question that might be similar to one that you answered earlier, but I think it's good to ask.
Okay.
You say that the extinction events happened independently before humans, but also that natural disasters happen because we cause them indirectly because of our relationship to God. Why did these independent natural disasters occur before humans? Why don't they happen now? And if they do happen now, why should we love a God that causes natural disasters without reason?
Wow, thank you. That's very insightful. And I don't have a complete answer to that. I do know that the Bible shows us in Genesis 3 that the physical world isn't right because we're not right. Our understanding of previous extinction events, and again, I'm no expert on this, suggests that they weren't caused by direct human impact. I can believe both of those things to be true without necessarily knowing how they fit together. I do know, to the final point of that question, that God cares more about life than we do. I believe he's sovereign. I believe he's in control of all things. I believe he cares more about life than we do. He cares more about the planet than we do. He cares more about the human race than we do. And we live in a world where there is destruction on all three of those fronts. So God is sovereign over those things. I don't think he's responsible for them in the sense of being the cause of them. And in fact, tonight's talk this evening is going to kind of play into the relationship between a God of love and a world in which there is plenty of suffering. So that might be a good thing to come back if you want to think more about that. So yeah, I can't kind of answer that definitively, but I can show you the various things that I believe and hold to be true, even if I don't always know how they fit together.
We still have some good questions here, so I was thinking we'll have maybe 3 or 4 more questions.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll go from this one on the phone. So faith is meant to legitimize and encourage my care of the environment, but I already do care. So why does it matter what God has to say when other people are already saying there's a problem and we need to fix it? Do I need a God to care?
Plenty of people care about the world who are atheists, or who, for that matter, are adherents of other religions. I think the Christian worldview gives you the best and most coherent reasons to care about the planet. You can be. I'll go out on a limb here and shoot me down for this if you want to. You can be an atheist who is an environmentalist, but I find it very hard to say that you can be an atheist environmentalist consistently, because I don't know from where in your atheism you derive the objective moral impetus to care about the physical world. Because if you simply believe there's no God and this universe has come as a result of random processes, then I don't see a moral imperative. I just see... Are you going to ask on this? Have you got a question? Yeah, please do. Where's our rover? No, if it's on this, then please do.
You say that we need a God to care about the earth, but the earth is home to everybody, atheists or believing. And so, atheists, I'm an atheist and I care about the planet because my children will grow up here, potentially, and this is my home. I have all the reason in the world to care. It's kind of my...
I believe you.
But yet you say that...
but I don't think that's consistent.
What do you mean by consistent?
What I mean is I think Christianity, more than any other belief system, gives us a rationale for why we should care for the planet, more than simply because I want to look after my kids or my grandkids or whatever else. It gives us an objective reason outside of all of us why the physical earth is good and why life itself has value and should be preserved. If I'm just slightly playing devil's advocate here, and I don't mean to disrespect your atheism, but if all I have to go on is, say, evolution, then actually my existence has come about precisely because of extinctions. And I don't believe the world is going to go on forever. And so I'm suggesting if you were to be thoroughly consistent with that worldview, it's very hard to say that future extinctions, even of the human race, are morally wrong. We may say they are scientifically inevitable or part of the kind of further evolutionary process, and something else will pop up after we've left the place that will be even more evolved than we are. But I'm trying to suggest that it's very hard to have an objective moral framework for caring about the physical world and life on this earth just from a worldview of atheism. I'm not denying that you do. I'm sure you do. And there will be many who are not Christians, who actually put Christians to shame with their care. But I think the Christian faith gives us a more coherent rationale for that care. And so while, if you sampled the global population and found out what proportion of the environmentalists were Christians, and I'm sure it's only a minority who are Christian, but I think the Christian faith gives us the most coherent rationale for it, which is why I'm commending it to you.
And don't you think that as a Christian, you might believe that, well, since we have a life after death, these issues, while we're alive, become much less important. It's much easier to disregard and think, I'm a good Christian and I'll go to heaven afterwards, and this won't be my problem anymore. Whereas as an atheist, I know that this is the only life I get, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure that my life is, I enjoy it to the maximum, and that everyone around me can do the same, and the future generations as well.
Thank you. It's possible, but I don't think it would be consistent for a Christian to think that. And there are Christians who do say that. I've met Christians who will say, well, this earth is not my home, and therefore it doesn't matter what I do with it. But I think that's a misunderstanding of what Christians believe. Because if this world has been created by God and is good in his sight, if the world is the Lord's and everything in it, then actually those things are objectively morally good, whether or not we have a resurrection or not. And even more than that, the tenet of the Christian faith is not that one day God is going to beam us up out of this world into some other place called heaven. The end point for the Christian faith is this earth being renewed, as one of the people was saying earlier, that there will be a renewed heaven and earth. And so we look forward to eternity on a renewed this world. And so actually this is the only planet I will live on. And I believe it has a glorious future under God that is going to come in the age to come. And so I believe that gives me even more incentive to live in a way now that is consistent with what I believe life is going to be like for eternity. But I take your point that there are Christians who argue the other way, and I would say it's a lack of their Christianity rather than a product of their Christianity that leads to that mindset.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Here's one more question. If we are stewards of this earth, doesn't that make us slaves of God and make our existence quite mundane?
No. I mean, yes, it means I'm obligated to God. I believe that we owe him our life's worship and devotion, but I also believe that it is in that we experience the fullest kind of life that is possible. The way I think about it is this: freedom isn't the absence of constraint. Freedom is the presence of the right kind of constraint. We are designed, I believe, to be worshippers of God and to live under God's loving rule over our lives. And if God is the God that Jesus reveals to us, he's a God who's for us, who knows us better than we know ourselves, loves us more than we love ourselves, and is more committed to our ultimate joy than even we are. And therefore, his ways will actually be the best ways for us. And so it's only when we step away from God that's when we diminish our experience of having fullness of life. It's a bit like what Hamish was saying last night, that actually we're designed to find our satisfaction in God. And for us to think, well, if I was away from God, I would have more freedom, is like a fish thinking, you know what, if I was on the beach, I would have more freedom than if I was here in the ocean. The fish is designed for the constraints of the ocean. That's where the fish can really live. That's where the fish can fulfill its fishiness. And for us, it's living in a relationship with our Creator. That's where we are designed to fulfill our humanity. And it's only actually when we step outside of that, we find ourselves in harmful forms of slavery to other kinds of ideas and ideology. But my conviction as a Christian is that the God we see revealed to us in Jesus Christ is a God of kindness. Not a God who's just trying to exploit us, but a God who is kind to us. And therefore living in a relationship with him is the best way to live. If it's a slavery, it's a slavery that we were designed for, that we will flourish under.
Thanks for that question. We'll wrap up with this last question. If humanity were to go extinct on this planet, would God create new humanity? Is it the planet that is important to God, or our species?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think the answer is both. I mean, we know that the planet matters to God because he made it. He says in Genesis 1, it is good. It was good before we turned up, according to Genesis 1. It was already good. So I don't think it was only good because we were going to be there. It's good in and of itself because God made it. And we know that he particularly cherishes human life. We have a place in his affections that is unique among all life on this planet. And so God cares about this world and he cares about us. I don't think there's a choice between the two there. And I take it that because God cares for both and loves both, that's why his purposes include an eternity for both.
Oh, we have one question from the floor.
Oh my God, that was loud. I was just wondering in relation to, well, sorry, this is a couple of questions back, but I also felt like kind of related to this one. In the question of like natural hazards, for example, because I do geography, and from what I learn, say like natural hazards like earthquakes and landslides, it's just part of the landscape evolution, and it's part of the system adjusting itself to reach a more steady state. And what I would have said, like what I would have thought, is that it's just part of like the landscape managing itself, rather than natural hazard being like necessarily an inherently bad thing or yeah. So I'm trying to word this coherently.
No, you're doing great. That makes sense. Yeah.
But then in relation to what you said, well, if the world is created inherently good, are these processes good or bad? Yeah. I don't know how to reconcile the two, in the sense that inevitably they do cause deaths, and they do cause fatalities, and they do cause damages, but
thank you.
How do you reconcile
I get what you're asking.
That?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to say, in response to the first part, whether it's part of the natural world however you put it, stabilizing itself or whatever it was, or whether it's part of a reflection of our sinfulness. I can't remember how you worded that part. I can believe it's both things at the same time. But I also believe that when we see an event like, and again, many of you may not have been very old when this happened and been very conscious of it at the time, but the Boxing Day tsunami that happened in, was it 2003 or thereabouts? Every instinct in our humanity, when we see that level of natural devastation, every instinct within us says that's wrong. We can say at one level that's part of the physical processes of the way the world works. There's an earthquake under the Indian Ocean, that causes a tsunami, that causes the flood, and that causes that amount of human death. But at the same time, our deepest instinct is to think that shouldn't happen. It affects us deeply, and it's as if this is the only world we've ever known. We've only ever known a world where this kind of stuff happens, and yet we've got from somewhere this deep instinct that kind of stuff just shouldn't happen. There's something not right about that. It lands on us in a way where we don't just go, yep, that's nature, that's a shame, but that's just nature. We have a visceral reaction that I think belies that we know a little bit more than we think we do. And it may be natural in terms of the processes of the world in which we live, but we sense we're designed for a world where these things shouldn't happen, where there shouldn't be that kind of loss of life. And again, I think that would tie in well with what we will be thinking about tonight. So if you're free either later on this afternoon for the Global Vision or for the evening event or for both, I think we're going to be teasing out some of those questions there.
Yeah, we really appreciate all your questions, and we're glad for your time. Thank you for coming. Yeah, well, Sam and I will be down here at the front if you want to talk to Sam anymore. Feel free to come and ask your questions. Else, feel free to hang out in the cafe space. This is a space for chats of, about life and meaning and faith. So you're very welcome here. Hopefully we'll see you tonight at any of our events or even tomorrow lunchtime. But thanks for coming, guys.